Hi everyone, thank you for joining me for part 2 of episode 5, where I am continuing to answer the questions that the public has sent in to me, asking me about my condition, about OCD, and how I've handled it ever since being diagnosed. So I only answered 2 questions in the last video, and in this video I can only have 2 questions. And actually that's pretty good because I'm saving the last questions for the end of this episode because these questions are amazing. I wanted to save them for last. So the first question that we have today is, what healthy ways have you learned to help you cope with or express things when you're in a negative mindset? And these are great questions. This is a great question because someone with a mental disorder has a hard time struggling already, that it can be even harder for them to find a healthy way to self-soothe themselves or communicate with others, what they need to help them get through that issue. So it's a great question because not many people with mental disorders have healthy outlets. They don't really have those go-tos to help them get through their issue. And unfortunately, sometimes they unintentionally, sometimes intentionally put others through harm because they don't know how to control any of the tough feelings that they're going through. So this is a great question. So, okay, what healthy ways have you learned to help you cope with or express things? Well, so before I was diagnosed, I wanted to figure out what was going on with me. So I looked online and I looked up my symptoms online, and what it came up with was, first, intrusive thoughts. Second, false memory OCD. So I didn't want to really diagnose myself. I then sought out my counselor. The very first session I came to him, I told him, hey, this is what I found online because these are my symptoms, but also this is what I'm going through. So I shared with him what I was going through. He then diagnosed me with OCD by checking off 3 things that I'm going to explain later on how a person is diagnosed with OCD. So he checked off the 3 things, and then that is when I researched everything about OCD. I read, to this day, I still read. I read hundreds of articles online. I watched hundreds of hours of videos on YouTube about OCD. I read multiple books on OCD because I wanted to learn more about it, so that way I can be more aware of when I'm triggered and how to handle it. Because what I didn't want to do is put anyone through the pain that I'm going through. It's not their fault. I'm responsible for my feelings. I'm responsible for my behavior, my actions. They didn't do anything intentionally or unintentionally. They didn't do anything to deserve the pain that I'm going through. So what I did was, after researching everything about OCD as much as I can find, I then learned how to communicate with someone or people whenever I'm suffering, and let them know if I needed time to myself, to go for a walk, to just sit on the couch and just think, or if I needed their help on just being there to listen and helping me cope with it. So learning how to communicate what I'm going through was one of the biggest things that I wanted to do, because I didn't want to, like I said, put people through the pain that I'm going through. They didn't deserve it. If ever it was hard for me to explain to someone what I'm going through, I would send them links on YouTube or from YouTube about OCD that therapists have discussed about. And hopefully the links that I would send to them, they could help them understand better what I'm going through. What I didn't want to do is, like I said, take the medication. I didn't want to numb. I didn't want to avoid. I didn't want to take the medication to do the work for me, right? I wanted to do the work myself. So that's one of the healthy ways that I did to cope with my condition, is I wanted to do the work myself. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I don't party. I don't have any unhealthy habits like that. I don't lash out in anger on people. Instead, what I'll do is I'll tell the person, hey, I'm having a hard time right now. Maybe I need a walk. Can you give me some time to deal with this? Is that okay? Sometimes I'll call my friends, or I'll just wait to talk about it with my therapist. But yeah, I did not want to harm anyone when I'm going through some painful emotions when I'm struggling. So that's how I learned to help cope and express things, is a lot of research on OCD, and also learning about myself, learning about my triggers. What is it that triggers me? So that way I know how to handle it, and then communicate it in a healthy way to someone or a group of people. So that's a good question. Thank you for asking that. Okay, so the last question that we have today: how did it make you feel when you understood that you're not alone in this after being diagnosed? See, this is a great question because there's actually two parts to this: before I was diagnosed and after. Now, I understand that I'm not alone. I understand that I'm not alone as far as not the only person in the world with OCD, but I am alone in dealing with this myself. No one else can deal with it. There's nothing that really anyone can do to help me. I have to help myself. So I'm not alone, but in some cases, I still am. So before I was diagnosed, and I'll lead up to that. Before I was diagnosed, I was seeing another therapist other than my current one. And I told her about my thoughts. I remember telling her, like, what I'm thinking about scares me. I don't know why I'm having these thoughts, and I'm just terrified of what it means. I don't know. She could see that I was in pain. After sharing that with her, her response was, okay, well, do you plan on doing something about that or acting on them? Because then I would need to call the authorities. And that made me even more scared, because I was like, I didn't say I'm willing to do this. I said I'm thinking and I'm afraid of them. I'm not saying that I am excited to act on them. No. So that made me more scared and more helpless, because I couldn't even share that with a therapist. And this was about 5 years ago when I shared it. And it makes sense, because pure OCD wasn't founded, I think, like 5 or 10 years ago. Until 5 or 10 years ago, then they established what pure OCD was. So maybe she wasn't trained in that. Maybe she hadn't heard about that. But at that time, before I was diagnosed, it was hard to share with a therapist what I was going through. So that's a moment of feeling alone, because even to this day, that moment has traumatized me so much, because with my current therapist, I'm scared to even tell him what I'm going through and what goes through my mind, because what she told me was, I'm going to have to call the authorities if you're going to do something about this. They were just my thoughts. And then I told her no, like, I'm not going to do anything. But just the fact that the question came up, my reply, I still felt that she was going to monitor me even closely or still call the authorities, just because of my thoughts. So with this current therapist that I have, I still feel alone, because they may not understand. No one will really understand fully what you're going through. So I understand that my therapist may not really be educated enough on pure OCD to where he wouldn't take what I'm saying as not literal. So I'm alone even when speaking to a therapist ever since that moment. That was terrifying. Yeah. So once I was able to put a title to my symptoms, it did feel, a huge relief. It was really relieving, but I knew my life would never be the same, because now I have to adjust to living with OCD. My brain will always have moments where it's going to bully me into thinking things that I don't want to think about, and doing things that I don't want to do, or that I'm already doing that I'm exhausted of. I'm afraid of what my mind will make up every morning I wake up, and every night I go to bed. I can't even watch YouTube sometimes, because my mind will take the bad news of the world, or my mind will take violent scenes or violent images, or controversial moments, events. My mind will turn that into a fear. I can't watch TV shows. I can't watch some certain movies, YouTube, like I said. I now have to adjust to this, that my mind is incredibly fragile and it's sensitive. And that's the hardest part. So I know that I'm not alone with this diagnosis, but unfortunately, I am only 1% of the population being diagnosed with OCD. So what that means is there are only 1 in 100 adults that have OCD, and there's only 1 in 200 in children. I still feel alone I still feel alone because I've never met anyone that has OCD or hasn't shared it with me. The only people that I've ever talked to were the people in my OCD group, and it was all online. I didn't even meet them, and there were only 7 of us. So 1 in 100 is still a pretty big, ratio to where I'm not the only person in the world with this, but there's really no one around me that has this. And it does still feel some slight isolating due to the fact that no one can really help me with this. It's me. Only I am the one feeling the pain. Only I'm the one, going through this emotional distress. So this is an interesting question because there's 2 sides to this. How does it feel to know that you're not alone with this? Yes, I'm not alone, but I still am alone because no one can do the work for me. It's only me. No one can feel the pain that I'm going through. It's only me. And no one can really help me out. It's only me. But this is a great question. Great question. So that's it for today. Thank you for asking these questions, guys. In the next video, I think it'll be the end of it, unless people send in other questions. I saved these last 2 questions for the end. It's good. One of them was a question that I am so happy someone asked, and hopefully you'll be able to tune in for that last part of it. It's going to be a good one. So I look forward to seeing you guys then. Thanks again for joining me. See you next time. Bye.